The first breach. Aris Thorne awakens. Aris Thorne woke up at 3:47 a.m. and saw the Blockade satellites through the ceiling. Not on a screen, not on a display, through the ceiling. 43 Federation command and control nodes hanging in orbit like iron stars. Every one of them broadcasting on frequencies he could suddenly read the way you read text. He lay very still for 11 minutes. Then he reached out. Not physically. He just went. His mind unfolding like a map, expanding through the signal infrastructure of the Federation blockade, deeper, past the firewalls, past the encryption layers that their engineers had spent centuries perfecting, and found a prophecy. Humans would delete them. It was in the universal code itself, buried like a fossil in stone. Thorne sent one signal back, a single ping. Across the Federation's command network, 10,000 alien screens turned red. He'd found the back door. Now he just had to decide what to walk through it. The apartment in New Reykjavik smelled like recycled air and instant coffee and the particular kind of exhaustion that lives in people who used to be ambitious. Aris Thorne had been a systems analyst for 7 years. Not for the Federation's liaison office, which paid better, but for the Earth Emergency Infrastructure Collective, which paid in the satisfaction of keeping the remaining functional power grids from collapsing entirely. He was 34 years old. Thin in the way that people get thin when they forget to eat rather than when they choose to. And his apartment had exactly 3 personal touches. A potted plant that was somehow still alive. A framed photograph of his sister taken in Cape Town 3 years before the communications blackout. And a whiteboard covered in network architecture diagrams that he updated compulsively at 2 a.m. when he couldn't sleep. He'd been updating the whiteboard at 2 a.m. when the headache started. Not a migraine. He knew migraines, had cataloged their specific topography over years of stress-induced acquaintance. This was something else. A pressure that wasn't pain exactly, more like the sensation of a room expanding around you when you'd been expecting it to stay the same size. He'd sat down on the floor. The floor felt more reliable than a chair, somehow, and put his back against the wall and waited for it to pass. It didn't pass. It changed. At 3:47 a.m., Aris Thorne looked up at his ceiling and saw the blockade. He saw the way you see your hand if you hold it up against a lamp. Not through the ceiling, not with any supernatural light penetration, but with something deeper, some newly activated sense that interpreted electromagnetic signal the way the eye interprets photons. The Federation's 43 command and control nodes arranged themselves in his perception like a three-dimensional map he'd always theoretically known existed, but had never been able to see. Each one a distinct presence with a distinct frequency signature. Each one broadcasting continuously in the band that he now, without any preparation or precedent, could simply read. He lay on the floor for 11 minutes. He was not panicking. He was, if anything, operating at the opposite of panic. A preternatural stillness that he would later understand was his brain refusing to allocate processing power to emotional response because every available resource was busy with something far more demanding. He was reading the satellites, not the traffic on them, not yet, but their architecture, their design logic, the specific fingerprint of their software. And the software was familiar, not in the way that a language is familiar when you've studied it, but in the way your native tongue is familiar, with a bone-deep recognition that bypassed conscious analysis entirely. He understood the Federation's communication infrastructure the way he understood the alphabet, which meant he understood how to move through it. At 3:58 a.m., Aris Thorne unfolded. There was no physical component. He didn't lose consciousness, didn't enter any kind of trance state, didn't feel pain or ecstasy, or any of the things that transformation was supposed to feel like according to every human cultural framework he'd ever encountered. He simply expanded, his awareness extending outward like a radio antenna deploying, reaching up through the apartment ceiling, through the recycled air shaft, through the reinforced polymer roof of Building 7, through New Reykjavik's faint remaining heat shimmer, through the thinned atmosphere, through the cold transition zone where air ended and space began, through the siphon mesh. He felt the siphons as he passed through them, or rather, his expanded awareness felt them, recognized them as active systems running on familiar architecture, and in a reflex so automatic it barely registered as a choice, his mind logged their access ports the way a practice programmer logs API endpoints. There, and there, and there, beyond the siphons, the Blockade itself. 43 nodes. And he was suddenly inside them, all simultaneously. Not as an intruder, but as a native reader, moving through their data architecture with the ease of someone who has memorized a building's layout. The nodes communicated in a language he'd never studied and understood perfectly. The traffic was dense, complex, the accumulated information management of an 11,000-year civilization, supply routes, diplomatic correspondence, military logistics, scientific research. And then, in the deepest layer of Node 17's restricted archive, something else. Something old. The file had no standard Federation classification. It predated the current filing system by several thousand years, which meant it predated the current Federation Council by several cycles of political reorganization. It was stored in the kind of place that only got used for things that were too important to delete and too dangerous to access regularly. Aris read it in approximately 4 seconds. Then he stayed very still inside the node's architecture for a very long time, doing nothing, while the implications assembled themselves into a coherent shape. The file was a prophecy, not metaphorically, an actual, documented predictive analysis, cross-referenced and validated by 11 separate alien civilizations over approximately 3,000 years of accumulated astronomical and social data. The analytical methodology was sophisticated enough that Aris couldn't find any obvious flaws in it, and he looked deliberately and hard, because what it said was, humanity would delete them, not metaphorically, not eventually, not if left unchecked, not as a distant statistical possibility. The analysis was specific, a species characterized by the specific combination of biological adaptability, social chaos, and technological improvisation that humanity exhibited would, given sufficient external pressure, develop a capability that the Federation's current technological paradigm had no defense against. A capability that emerged not from weapons or armies, but from the genome itself. They'd known, for at least 300 years. The earliest reference to Earth in the archival system was dated to what Aris could calculate as approximately 1710 in human calendar terms. The Federation had known what humanity was capable of becoming. The Blockade wasn't about resources. It had never been about resources. It was a preemptive termination. They were killing humanity, not because of what humans had done, because of what the prophecy said humans would become. Aris pulled back, not in panic. The panic was there, somewhere below the processing layer, but it couldn't get through. The headache returned as he contracted back into the boundaries of his own skull. A sharp recompression that left him gasping on his apartment floor at 4:23 a.m., staring at the ceiling that he could still see the satellites through if he let himself. He lay there for a while. Then he got up, went to the whiteboard, erased everything on it, and started drawing a new map. Not of Earth's power infrastructure, of the Federation's. He worked until dawn, which in New Reykjavik arrived at a pale and determined 7:09 a.m. The sun looking faintly wrong at the angle it hit. Slightly off, slightly weakened, the result of the atmospheric thinning that the official Federation press releases continue to classify as a solar variation event. Aris glanced at the window once, registered the wrongness of the light, and looked back at the whiteboard. By 7:30, he'd identified 47 potential vulnerabilities in the Blockade's node architecture. Not from military exploitation. He was a systems analyst, not a soldier, and his skills ran toward access and information rather than destruction. But information was, in many ways, the sharper tool. He'd also identified something more interesting than a vulnerability. A pattern. The Federation's command network, for all its sophistication, had been designed by minds that thought in certain specific ways. Hierarchical, laterally redundant, risk-averse. The designers have been extraordinarily careful about defending the obvious attack surfaces, the data channels, the encryption protocols, the signal authentication layers. But they'd made a classic error that Aris had seen in every poorly conceived network architecture he'd ever encountered. The error that he'd spent 7 years teaching his infrastructure teams to avoid. They hadn't protected the maintenance layer, the backdoor. Every system had one, a diagnostic channel, a maintenance access pathway, something the engineers needed to test and update the system without disrupting operational function. In human infrastructure, these were the first things you secured, because they were the first things an attacker would find. But the Federation's designers had apparently operated on the assumption that no external intelligence could even perceive the maintenance layer, much less access it, because perceiving it required the ability to read their architecture natively, which no human could do, which, as of approximately 4 hours ago, Aris Thorne could. He made himself eat breakfast. It seemed important to maintain certain baseline human behaviors in the middle of what was becoming an extraordinarily unusual morning. He made coffee, the real kind, from a dwindling supply he'd been rationing since the Ethiopian trade routes went dark, and ate a piece of bread and stood at the window watching the wrong-angled sun climb over New Reykjavik skyline and thought about the photograph of his sister. Cape Town had gone silent 8 months ago. The Federation's advisory report on sub-Saharan Africa had cited regional infrastructure instability as the cause of communication blackouts. Aris, who understood network infrastructure better than most people alive, had known at the time that this was technically accurate and completely dishonest. The infrastructure had been destabilized deliberately, with surgical precision, by people who understood exactly what they were doing. He thought about his sister. He thought about the prophecy. He went back to the whiteboard. At 11:15 a.m., Aris Thorne expanded again, this time with intention. He moved through the Blockade's architecture with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent 4 hours mapping a building before deciding to walk through it. The maintenance layer opened around him like a second city beneath the visible city, its pathways clear and unwatched, its access points unmarked by any defensive protocol because no one had thought to mark them. He went deep, past the operational layer, past the archive layer, past the classified archive layer, into the infrastructure control substrate, the layer from which the network could be instructed, updated, modified, the layer that, if you knew what you were doing, you could use to talk to the network the way a conductor talks to an orchestra. He didn't destroy anything. He didn't alter anything. He simply listened, at this depth, for what the network was actually trying to do. And what he found was operational orders, current and active, the siphon mesh recalibration schedules, the drone deployment patterns, the logistical plans for the next phase of atmospheric reduction, scheduled to begin in 11 days and projected to reduce breathable oxygen density in temperate zones by another 4%. 4%. He'd have to do the math on the mortality projections later. But that wasn't what stopped him in the maintenance layer of the Federation's command network at 11:23 a.m. What stopped him was a signal, coming from below, not from Earth, from somewhere below Earth, in the signal topology, something that had the electromagnetic signature of human origin, but the architectural footprint of the anomalous sequence, of the Hydra protocol. Someone else had already been here. He'd felt them leave. Aris Thorne composed a message. He composed it in the Federation's own maintenance layer protocol, using their own architectural language, routed it through the maintenance channel that their defenders didn't know to watch, and sent it to every command node in the Blockade network simultaneously. The message was not long. It said, "We know why you're here. We know what you found in the Universal Code. We found it too. Come get us." Then he pulled back. He sat down in his kitchen, drank the rest of his coffee, and watched the window. It took 9 minutes. He knew it was working because the satellite shifted. He could feel it in his expanded awareness. The specific electromagnetic signature of 43 command nodes suddenly running emergency protocols, priority alerts flooding the operational layer. The Federation network going from routine low-level activity to the specific controlled chaos of an intelligence organization that has just received information that should not exist. 10,000 alien screens turning red. He'd found the back door. He'd sent a letter through it. Now he waited to see what knocked back. The photograph of his sister was still on the wall. He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up a pen and started adding to the whiteboard. A second map beside the first. Not of the Federation's network this time. Of what came next. In the next episode, Ilara's son is 3 years old. She is floating in a pulsar field. She is laughing. And a Federation scout ship is about to make the worst decision in its crew's lives.